Welcome everybody to another episode of Rise Urban Nation. I got my brother. When I say my brother, I truly mean that from the bottom of my heart. This is family that we got on
Most
the
definitely.
show today. Eric Morrison-Smith. If you don't follow this brother on Twitter, I make sure you go check him out now. Like Eric is one of those people that I follow on Twitter that I get educated, entertained, enlightened, and inspired all at the same time. So
That's funny. I appreciate it, bro. That's love right there. I appreciate that.
anytime, brother. Thanks for coming on. But before we get into this interview, I gotta pay the bills. So let me get this in real quick. This little commercial. Well, not commercial, partnership. So for most of you guys know, Rise Urban Nation is now partnering with Taylor Brands, which is the official site for your brand, your logo, and starting your business. So if you want to design a logo, create a website, claim your domain, and get ready to go and get your business or your passion or your blog out there, you can have it all in one place with Taylor Brands. With over 25 million people who have turned their passion into a business, including myself, I have used Taylor Brands to highlight, grow my business and get started. Start my LLC, trademark the name, and most of you know that we had a little problem where we had to rebrand in the middle of the year due to some lawyers getting involved and all that good stuff. And Taylor Brands helped me through that transition. So sign up today. Use Terrell Simmons at the checkout and get 30% off. Taylor Brands, everything that you need for your business. All right, my brother, Mr. Eric Morrison-Smith, man. You know, uh, first let's do this. Let's take them back through the journey how we first got acquainted. So for those that don't know, me and Eric, we go back like beans and pacifiers now. But we started in Rye, San Diego. You know what? I never got your story. How did you get into Rye, San Diego? Like, how did that
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah, it's kind of funny, man. So after I graduated college, I knew that I wanted to work in the nonprofit sector, but had absolutely no connections. I'm from San Diego, but I went to school in Nebraska and just hadn't made any real like San Diego professional connections. So what I did is when I got back, I literally went and I tried to find every nonprofit in San Diego who I thought was doing interesting work, tried to find
Mhm.
emails from the executive directors who were working at those nonprofits. And then I just sent them an email. I basically was like, yo, my name's Eric Morrison-Smith. I just graduated from Nebraska with my degree in business management. I played football. Here are the skills that I have learned over time. And I'm just looking for an opportunity to have coffee with you and have a conversation. And I actually sent that to a bunch of different politicians as well because I was also interested in political work. Um, and of the like 40 people that I wrote, Dwayne Crenshaw was one of the people who responded. It was like, all right, we'll have coffee. Um,
Right.
we met at Starbucks. We had a conversation. And then he basically was like, I'll pay you $500 a month to be my right hand man. Um, and I said, all right,
Wow.
bet. And then, a couple months later, I was a program manager for the organization. So that's actually how I got connected into to Rise San Diego.
Nice, nice. And for those people who don't know, what is Rise San Diego? Because I don't think I fully introduced my audience to Rise San Diego just yet.
Oh wow, okay. Oh, you want me to do
No,
it?
you tell me.
Oh, you
Yeah,
want me
what
to do
you
it? Yeah,
doing?
yeah, yeah. My bad, my bad. Yeah. So basically, Rise San Diego is an organization that's really focused on developing Black and Brown leaders in the community so that they could, go and engage their folks for change in San Diego. The three big pillars that I remember when I worked there is we would have community events where we had different dialogues about the issues that were happening in Black and Brown communities and, talk through solutions. So that was one
Mhm.
pillar. The second pillar was the leadership program, which is what, how I met Terrell and some of the other dope people who have been on the podcast. Um, and then the third piece is we basically organized different civic engagement like town halls, dialogues, stuff like that, depending on what was happening in San Diego. So, like for one example, when San Diego Unified was getting ready to, change some processes, we would organize town halls so that community could come and share the perspective on, what changes should happen and what they wanted. So, that's the type of work that Rise San Diego does, and what I got to do for my first salary job.
Man, that's crazy. That was your first salary job, because that was such an impactful job. You know, the crazy thing is me being in that program, because like even though you were the program manager, I felt like you was part of our cohort, because I
Yeah.
was part of the cohort 3, and I felt like you was sometimes you was part of our cohort. So I s- I didn't see you as a program manager. I saw you as my cohort brother. And by
Hmm.
the way, shout out to cohort 3. I still think Gen 3 it is the best. I mean, we got Sean Elo, we
Hmm.
got me, we got Andrew, we got Monica Montgomery.
Yeah.
I ain't bragging or nothing. I'm just saying third time's a
Yeah,
charm.
it was a solid class, man, and I'm so thankful that I got to be a part of it, because you're right. Like, I was basically a fellow, even though I was a program manager, and I learned so much from you, Andrew, Sean, and all the people you just mentioned, and others. So I'm super thankful for that. It's a dope class.
You just reminded me. I got to get Miss Monica Montgomery on for an interview now. So,
Yeah, for sure.
um, yeah. So now, take me through the steps of your career, because I know that was an amazing first job. Because I always like to highlight people's career transition and how they got to where they are today, and then hopefully somebody gets inspired by your story and journey. So, what? Wait, I know Rise was your first salary
Hmm.
job, but did you have a first job before that?
Oh
Like,
yeah,
was there? Okay, what
yeah.
was your job before that?
So my first look, let me put it this: my first unofficial job was selling candy to my middle school classmates. So my mom and my grandpa, like my granddaddy's an entrepreneur, my mom is just like
Uh-huh.
him. And my mom in middle school was going and buying like bulk boxes of Starburst, excuse me, and Skittles, and was basically like, all right, Eric, you're gonna go and you're gonna sell these for $1 each. They're
Uh-huh.
about 25 cents worth, so you're gonna make a 75% profit. So that was really like my first job, was selling candy in middle school. But I didn't have to pay taxes on that job. The first W-2 job that I had was at a gas station, bro. When I was 16,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I worked at a gas station and car wash. I was working the register and cleaning toilets. Um,
Man.
yeah, and it was a crazy experience. Like, I honestly like learned a lot about discipline, showing up on time, and just like working hard. Because
Uh,
as I'm sure all your viewers know and yourself, there ain't nothing worse than having to clean up a you know a, a gas station bathroom.
woo, you ain't
So
never lie about that.
yeah, yeah, it was pretty bad. But that getting that money was nice, especially for a 16-year-old. I wasted it
Right.
all on movies, but it was still nice.
Right. And I feel like that work ethic translated to, some of the work that you put in a day to get where you at in your career. I've seen you transition from there, the workforce partnership, to now
Hmm.
policy work. Uh, it's like you finally there. You got it. You made it, right? Now tell
Yeah,
me, because I know I although I seen the transitions, like I don't like how did for you how did you take, like, say if somebody who's first time connecting with you, listening to this, what would you say were the steps that really helped you along the way to get to where you're at right now in your career?
yeah, it's a good question. And I get weary of telling my story sometimes, because I don't want it to appear like I pick myself up on my bootstraps thing, because it's not like that. Like, I've had a lot of support and random opportunities. But to
Hmm.
explain like how I've gotten into the roles, it actually kind of starts with how I got a football scholarship. And
Oh,
basically,
really?
yeah, so uh, basketball was my first love. I love
Uh-huh.
basketball. I wanted to be a professional basketball player. But by my sophomore summer going into my junior year, my mama was like, Eric, you're not growing any taller. And you're not like, and this was tough love. My mom is a great mother, but she basically told me, like, we ain't going to be able to get you into college unless you get a scholarship. So she was like, so I'm going to need you to play football. And I was highly upset about that. I was like, Mama, I'm not playing football. Football players are dumb and they're jocks, not like us professional basketball players. Um, and basically, look, my mom, and I'm going to get to how this connects to my professional life in a second. But my mom was basically like, all right, well, if you're not going to go out there and play football, then you're going to be the water boy and you're going to be out there every single practice, you know, serving them boys water. Um, so I was like, I went out there for a week. I was a water boy, and I'm like, no, we ain't gonna do this. So I ended up playing football. But after, and I had a good junior year. I was actually a decent football player from the start. Had a good junior year, but had no scholarships. And
Uh-huh.
I was like, damn, like I'm really not gonna be able to go to college. So what I started to do, same thing with how I got a job at Rise, is I started to research every college and the coaches that worked for those colleges, and I started to send them emails of my highlights, and I started making
Uh-huh.
phone calls like, "Hey, like, I've only been playing football for this long, but here's my stats and my highlights. I promise all I need is one opportunity." And it'll be the best decision you've ever made. Basically, doing sales pitches in high school,
Yeah.
and I had like two schools offer me scholarship because of that. Um,
Uh-huh.
so then now, like, you translate to like my professional career, and it's actually been a lot of the same. Like, my first salary job was for me being pretty proactive and reaching out to people, just trying to tell my story. And then even
Uh-huh.
with the job at Workforce Partnership, and the job I got at PolicyLink, it was making connections and then bugging people like, look, I really want to learn about this. Here's the skills that I bring to
Uh-huh.
the table. Will you give me an opportunity? Um, and just being proactive in that way has opened some doors that, like, quite honestly, have been hard to get into for a lot of
Mhm.
other folks. A lot of people talk to me about how PolicyLink is like one of the best organizations to work for in regards to policy and equity work. Um,
Mhm.
and are asking me how I got in. And it's like, bro, like I went to a lobby day that PolicyLink was hosted. I made one
Uh-huh.
connection. And then as soon as I got home, I sent them an email with my resume. Like, if there's a job that ever opens up, like, here's what I bring to the table.
But I love that story because I always tell people like, some people do the good old application route, but I think that's uh a thing of the past. And I tell
Yeah.
them like, look, what's that old saying? It's not what you know, it's who you know, right?
Yeah, it
And
is.
and I tell people I do you one better. It's who knows you, because like if nobody knows who you are, it, it then they have to do the research, right? Or you have
Yeah.
to be the sales pitch person. But
Yeah.
if you can if you could start mingling with the folks they mingle with and do good work with those folks, like I don't know how many times that
Hmm.
I've been in the spot from doing all the community work that we and you have done,
Yeah.
through workforce partnership, where my name got mentioned in rooms my feet haven't even touched yet.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and then about the time I get there, it's like there's this whole like story and narrative that's been told about me, and I'm hoping that it was all good. Most of the time, it seems good, so I don't know
Yeah.
because I showed up to the room, but for the most part, it seems like it was a good narrative and story. And it's like, hey, somebody told me you the person to speak to about such and such and such and such, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And that's just kind of how like our systems and our society is built. It's all based off of like relationships, who you know. And like people say that, but I think it really takes like experience to like fully understand that that's the case, and
Hmm.
I've mentioned I worked at a car wash and Rise and these other places, but I've had probably 10 different jobs over my lifetime and have
Yeah.
only gotten one job with no relationship included, And that was when I was 20 and I worked at Chili's. Okay. So every
Look,
other job that I've gotten was based off of networking, building relationships, and then just nagging folks, like
dang.
I have no shame about sending you 2 emails and then giving you the call, you know, to work at a place that I want to be at. So I definitely think that it's a requirement, and it doesn't always work out. Like I'm right now, you're hearing the times that it has worked out and the
Dang.
positive stuff, but I've also had some awkward interactions where like people are like, "Look, this is great, but like we're not going to hire you," you know
Yeah.
or like people who just never I've had people who didn't respond to my initial emails and who like completely blew me off, who are now like trying to offer me jobs 3
Look,
5 years later. So I think that one of the things that has just been helpful for me is even through the denial and sometimes the awkwardness, like just continue to persevere and reach out to people.
look, I love that. I love that. Um, Now we gonna go into your other things that you do, like borrow knowledge and so
Okay.
forth. And I'm trying to figure out how to best transition into that. But let me ask you this question, because I know you're a man who loves to read. You've
Mm,
had a lot of great experience in the community. You had your family. I just love hearing the many stories you told me about, getting reconnected to your dad, and
yeah.
then how your mom is. What's one good lesson life has taught you?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a really good question. Um, I think that, there's a lot that comes to mind. But I think that one of the most important things, and I don't know if life has taught me this or if I want to attribute it to my mother. But and you know what? And Rise actually is the place that gave me this terminology, but just learning to be adaptive. And when I remember when I first got exposed to the term, like I didn't necessarily understand it. But as I've gotten older and I've started to reflect on like the people in my life, I've learned that like my mom sort of embodies adaptability and just being able to maneuver through different challenges. And I've stopped using the word resilient just because I think that resilience is really about the ability to like take punishment or challenges, but keep moving forward. And like
Hmm.
my mom's adaptability is more like having challenges, but having a certain like street mark and cleverness to be able to adapt to her circumstances and still keep
Hmm.
going, which I feel like is a little bit different than resilience. So I think that, just from watching her and navigate like being a single mother, raising a black boy in America with a father or
Woo.
with a
Talk
lover who
about it.
is incarcerated, like watching her and how she adapted through all those different circumstances, I think it's like a lesson um, that has been like deeply embedded into me because even as I was talking about, not getting a scholarship, not having any connections when I came back, and so on. Um, it was remembering how my mom navigated different challenges that I
Hmm.
learned to do that myself. So I think that that's probably been the most valuable like lesson and skill um, that
Hmm.
I've learned through this life because I use it for literally everything I do. Even the small challenges in work, I've learned to
Yeah.
adapt to the circumstances and find creative solutions.
Yeah, I remember those adaptive leadership principles from Rise as well, and I must say I still use them to this day.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think that's like the embodiment and story of our peoples through uh, being in growing up, living, education wise in America,
Hmm.
our people have always have to be adaptive, right?
Yeah.
Even when I think about your story now, like your dad coming out of prison, and then
Yeah.
you guys being adaptive as a family with
Hmm.
trying to build. reconnect the family, and then all of the different loopholes that
Yeah.
are and challenges that have been presented, and some of them, like, I was just in awe of when I heard about it, because although my biological dad was in and out of jail, we didn't have that relationship, so I didn't get to see the other side of the coin of, like, what the system can be an extra barrier even after you've
Yeah.
done your time and you're trying to acclimate to society, right? It's just
Yeah.
crazy to me.
Yeah, and so your viewers know, let me like articulate some of the things that we've experienced. But basically, my father had been incarcerated from the time that I was 2 all the way until I was 28. Or excuse me, 2 until 26. I'm 28 right now. So he was incarcerated 24 years, and basically since he's gotten out, we've had to deal with so many different dynamics around, like, my family is in San Diego and he is in Los Angeles. And, basically the criminal legal system won't allow him to come down to San Diego to spend time, with my mom and my family. Since he's been out for these past couple years, we've gotten to spend like one Thanksgiving and one Christmas together. But just this last year, he wasn't allowed to come down. Um, and then the other thing that's just been a learning experience is, you know, um, the amount of money that is really sucked out of you as you're trying to support somebody re-entering back into society. Because since he's not allowed to come to San Diego and he stays in a transition home, whenever me and my mom went to go see him, we have to get a hotel for 2 to 3 nights, which is already $400. You know,
Mhm.
we have to eat out every meal. Um, so every time we want to go see my pops, we have to expect to drop at least $500 to $600. My
Mhm.
mom goes and sees him every other week, you
Mhm.
know. So it's been a lot to try to navigate that, and yeah, just dealing with the legal implications and then the financial. It's been crazy. and
Yeah.
um, and it's also been informative because, and I know we'll probably get into it at some point a little bit more, but like I do policy work around the criminal legal system, so to be able to one have experienced my father's incarceration my entire life, but then also experience him trying to transition back into society. I've just learned a lot through it, and it informs the work that I do.
Yeah, and I think that's a good. I mean, you're doing a natural segue right now. I think that's a good thing to have, because now life kind of blends with work now, and
Yeah.
and it probably helps you form better policies, right? In your role
hmm
at PolicyLink. Now, tell me a little bit about, like, what you do at PolicyLink, and how this has kind of helped you in making those decisions at PolicyLink, and in your job, or just in general with the work you do.
Yeah, for sure. So for those who don't know, PolicyLink is a nonprofit that's really focused on, racial justice and economic justice. I specifically work on the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color team, which is a
Okay.
network of 200 organizations across California who are really focused on transforming failed policies and systems. And I'm giving y'all the whole pitch. That's
Yeah.
focused on transforming policies and systems that fail boys and men of color, their families, and communities. And like what that looks like in practice is basically advancing state policies that are created by and for people who are directly impacted by these injustices that we're talking about. And we work across a variety of different issues. We work on policing, do a lot of work on like workforce development, and trying to
Hmm.
get resources to the small community-based organizations that are typically best suited to provide support for black and brown and poor folk. Um, and then and the other piece is like we just do a lot of advancing policies around the criminal legal system, and you know um,
Yeah.
really just trying to depower it a bit. That's the best way I could put it.
Okay. Nah, I think we get that. So, like, um, I When I seen you go into this role, I was like, oh man, it's perfect for Eric because he already came out of two entities that
Mhm.
kind of do it at the ground level, and
Yeah.
then and now you're adding this third element of just real life, which helps you kind of mesh it all together. So you have a very unique eye and lens that nobody else is gonna have with this work. So I was like, yes. Like when you got it, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
they don't know what they got. They got a diamond in the rough.
That's funny. I appreciate that. And I think that that you're right in that, the organizing and like leadership development work that I got to do with Rise, and then like going and working for an institution like workforce development helped me to like one always center people in my work, specifically black, brown, and poor people, but then two understand the limitations of an institution like the workforce
Mhm.
partnership.
Right.
And it was actually working there that I was like, so many of the issues that I'm concerned about are actually connected to systems and policies, which is
Mhm.
why I wanted to come and work at PolicyLink and the Alliance of Boys and Men of Color, so I could better understand like how is it that you change systems and you actually advance policies that support those at the bottom of our social hierarchy. Um,
Right.
and you're absolutely right. Like the experiences of having my father incarcerated and just also like growing up poor, being black,
Right.
have like deeply informed the policy issues that I work on and the analysis that I have, and it's crazy because just even, I'll give you one example. I'll give you two examples actually. Um,
Uh-huh.
we last year were working on a bill, AB 990, that would make visitation for incarcerated people a civil right. And basically,
Mhm.
it means that, like, if I want to go see my father, there, CDCR, which is the California Department for Rehabilitation and Corrections, whatever, something like that,
Mhm.
cannot bar me from seeing my father unless there was some type of like immediate risk, right? Like a
Mhm.
person who's incarcerated committed some type of violence during visitation. Um, and I got to play a big role in testifying for that bill and speaking to the issues related to that because of my father's incarceration. And the fact that there was a 10-year period where I did not get to see my father because they decided that they wanted to move him. He committed this crime in San Diego, but they wanted to move him 8 hours north. Um, in
Wow.
California, and to be able to go and like make the trip and go see my father during that time would have been nearly impossible because of the financial cost and, just the time required to, it's a 16-hour
Yeah.
trip. So I didn't get to see him for 10 years, right? And, these types of policies will ensure that, families stay connected and that
Yeah.
people who are inside get fully rehabilitated and remember why
Mhm.
it is they're trying to get out. So, you know, my personal experiences deeply impact the policy. And then the second thing, and I'll make this one a little bit quicker, but this year we're working on a policy that will basically end. Like I got to explain the issue. Right now, California has a law that basically says that for certain circumstances, it is mandatory for school administrators and teachers to call the police on students. Um,
What?
yeah, and it's for a variety of different behaviors, right? Like, if a
Yeah.
student brings a gun to school, like it could be seen as justified to call the police for a scenario like that. But if a student were to like talk back or disrupt the class or like get upset and say some stuff, he should not be getting the police called on him.
Mm.
And when I was in sixth grade, me and a couple of buddies, we walked home from school, and then we decided to ride our bikes back on the campus to kick it. And on our way back, a buddy accidentally ran into a classmate. The
Mhm.
next day, the principal called the police on us, and the cop was in there threatening us with handcuffs, basically trying to get the details out of us and threatening us, saying that if we don't tell him what happened, then we're all going to go to jail, you know? Um,
Wow.
so, like, not only do I get to work on these issues, but I have personal experiences that are deeply connected to them and inform, how I'm viewing the work that I'm doing. So,
Yeah.
yeah, you're right in that the work experience plus my personal experiences deeply inform and help shape the policy work that I get to do now.
Yeah, two things that came to mind when you were talking about that was for the first them moving your dad. I remember watching a Netflix, I think it was a Netflix special where they talked about, I can't remember which special it was, how sometimes I'm not saying this is the case for your dad, but how they move prisoners across state lines because they're using their body as a count for the voting system. And
Yeah.
like that's what came to mind. I was like, I wonder if they did it for that purpose. It's not saying that they did, but another thing that's a part of our system that is just has nothing to do with the rehabilitation of folks and
Hmm.
family, right?
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
and then for the one way that we can kind of do away with the second issue and not start this, I continue on this thread of, you know, the prison, the schools, prison, the pipeline system by
Yeah.
recorrecting how we do certain procedures and policies. And I remember seeing, I think it's called DOD, Dads on Duty, or something like that, where
Yeah.
one school, they got a bunch of community dads.
Hmm.
And they take shifts at the school, and anything happens, you call the dads on duty, and they come over there and they handle
Hmm.
it. And
Yeah.
that these, like, because of that, these dads' presence and so forth, like all of the incidents
Hmm.
decrease by like a significant amount, like
Absolutely.
to the single digit percentages. And I was like, that's dope. Like it was just a community led thing, right? So there's like
Yeah.
simple strategies that could be put in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the stuff that we're all about. It's like, how do we build the community-based alternatives and infrastructure that is, one, more like deeply connected and understanding of our circumstances, and two, is just more
Mhm.
effective. Though I saw
Yeah.
that video, and I remember just like listening to the teachers, the students, the dads, and all of them agreed that this was far more effective than having police who don't understand their students on campus.
Hmm.
And it made the students feel good, it made the dads feel good. And though I think that those are the type of community like programs and alternatives that we need to be thinking about funding, scaling, and making real, as opposed to just volunteer. I think those are the things that could be really beneficial to our communities. And I think those are the things that type of kind of like build community power as well, because it's putting things back in our hands. It's
Yeah.
not in the institution's hands anymore. We get to decide how we want this thing to look. So I
Yeah.
thank you for bringing that example, because I really did love that when I saw it.
Yeah, yeah, and and that gives us a perfect segue into, like, speaking of community and
Mm.
led solutions programs. There's, you know, before we started hitting the record button, me and him was really talking about like why I started this podcast because, you know, as Eric knows, like I used to, speak out in the public schools and do a lot of workforce development work in the community. On the onset of COVID, that really came to a halt, and you know doing more leadership development training with, especially people that look like us. I realized that, it's not only the students that have limiting beliefs about who we are and what we can be and what we can do. It's adults too that look
Mhm.
like us, and
Yeah.
we really needed a reconditioning of the mind. So a lot of this podcast was highlighting all of our brilliance and the things that we do out there to normalize a new story and hopefully start to do a paradigm shift. And something that, you know I don't know if you started it before COVID, borrowed knowledge, but I know the website kind of came forth
Mhm.
during COVID times, and I got to participate in several of your borrowed knowledge events. So let's jump into the borrowed knowledge. Tell the
Yeah.
folks about borrowed knowledge. How did you come up with this idea? What is it? How did you come up with this idea? And has it transitioned to as we know it today?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, and maybe I'll just start with how it got started, and then I'll speak to like what it's now become. But yeah, basically, as Terrell mentioned earlier, like I love to read. I love to dig deep into issues, but I was doing so much of that reading in isolation that I was like, yo, like I feel like there's an opportunity to get deeper into this and have conversations with folks because like collectively when we're all reading something there's just more opportunities to hear different perspectives, ask questions with one another and so on. So right when COVID had started, I had read this like super dope piece by Du Bois that just talked about the history, the rationale of Black cooperatives. And I was like, yo, like I gotta read this with other people. This is so dope. So I posted the link on Twitter and I said, are there some folks who'd be interested in reading about the history of Black cooperatives with me? Um, and three people responded. And I was like, all right, great. I'll send you a Zoom link. We'll find a time to meet. And we did. We had a conversation. I took notes and everybody just kept telling me how much they learned from that. Um,
Mhm.
and I was like, I didn't have any like long term plans at that point, but I just thought it was a really fun experience. I got to learn with some folks. Um, but then at the same time, I was struggling with some issues at work where like I just wasn't necessarily feeling like I was getting the opportunities to really develop my facilitation skills. And I wasn't really having the opportunity to be as creative as I would have liked. Um, so I was like, you know what? Like, I think I'm just gonna have to build something on myself to be able to develop some of these skills that I'm interested in furthering. Um, so then that's kind of when I was like, all right, like I'm gonna start to host more conversations and more community dialogues around different topics that we didn't get to discuss in schools or even in the workplace, um, and see what happens. Um, but right as I started to get this idea for, a space to have conversations and, to further develop my facilitation skills, I got exposed to another different reading um, by Ella Baker. And what I
Wait,
basically
what reading was this?
yeah,
What like
so it's the Radical Democratic Vision by Barbara Ransby, and it's basically a biography about Ella Baker. And for those of you who don't know, Ella Baker is like what a lot of people identify as the mother of the civil rights movement, but she was far more behind the scenes and she was far more concerned
mm,
about like the infrastructure of the civil rights movement and empowering um, like local leadership to really take charge of the movement themselves rather than
yeah,
a more top to bottom leadership structure, right?
gotcha.
And when I read her book and I learned about like democratic organizing and creating spaces that weren't so hierarchical, like I fell in love with it immediately because it felt so much more empowering than the spaces that I had been in. So I was like, okay, so not only am I going to create a space where people can come together and learn, but let's try to practice a creating a democratic space that actually isn't super reliant on a facilitator to lead the conversation. Um,
Mm,
and what that basically looked like was for the community conversations, and I'm sure you remember this, like the ground rules for the space were co-created before every session. You know,
mm-hmm.
I would start off the conversations with maybe like one introduction question to get folks started, but then we'll let them know the flow of this conversation is going to go based off of how you want to take it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So if, you want this conversation to go a certain way, y'all better start to ask questions and shape how it
Yeah.
goes. Um, And I think it ended up being like a really freeing experience for folks, just because like they weren't there to just like listen to one leader, and listen to my analysis of the issues. They got to share themselves what they were experiencing, what they were thinking, um, and so on. And basically, what borrowed knowledge has grown into since then is basically three different spaces. There's community learning circles where,
Mhm.
it's on a variety of different topics. These are all things that people have said that they want to talk about. And what I'll do is I'll put together a couple of resources on that specific topic. People could send me resources on it as well if they've been exposed to any. And then I'll share it out. I'll tell people, you don't have to read it if you don't want, because you already got all the brilliance within you.
Mhm.
Um, and we'll just have a open dialogue about what's coming up for us. And those are typically 60 to 75 minutes. Um, but then it's also grown into book clubs. There's been three book clubs in the past like 10 months. We've read All About Love by Bell Hooks, A Will to Change by Bell Hooks, and then currently reading Become an Abolitionist by Derica Purnell. Um, and then the last thing that is kind of formed out of it is basically what we're calling a collective. And it's like, 6 to 10 people who have basically decided that they want to be in community together in a more intentional way. And basically, what we do is we come together and we just talk about like the issues that we're experiencing, getting different perspectives on how we could navigate those scenarios, and just checking in on one another. Because one of the big things that I think why people felt connected to Borrowed Knowledge was because of all the
Mhm.
isolation that we were experiencing during COVID. And the fact
Right.
that we just weren't able to build community or be in community in the same way. So I think that this kind of provided space for people to be able to do that. Um, and yeah, that's basically that. It's been a pretty free form project that has kind of just evolved based off of the needs that have come up. Um, yeah, and that's that. And I'm super thankful that you've joined a good amount of the conversations, and people love
Mhm.
to hear from you when you show up.
Like, I'm gonna be honest. Uh, some of the stuff that I've done in creating new spaces in this diversity, equity, and inclusion space in this work, I've learned a great deal from you and being in those spaces of how to co-create space and build community. Um, and it's been a beautiful thing to have listening sessions or other spaces where they set some of the ground rules that and I know it's borrowed language, but giving empowering everybody to like, hey, this is your space.
Yeah,
Like, let's create this space together. How are we going to show up for each other in this space? What do we want to discuss,
yeah.
and how do we want to move forward, right? And then and at first, when people first come to it, they're not sure what to think or how
Hmm.
to, because like, oh, I've never had this before. Like, how
Yeah,
do I do this? And then somewhere in the middle, you start to see it form, and then by the end, they're like, all right, we got to do this again. This can't be.
yeah,
Everybody like, okay, when's the next one? We got to do this again because, like, now that I know, like, we need to create more of this because I need this is what I didn't know I needed this in my life, but this is what I needed in my life.
yeah. Exactly.
uh,
And I'm super interested in, like I've already shared, like community power and processes that empower others to take leadership themselves rather than rely on an individual for leadership. And I think that co-creating space like that really does that. And I remember the first couple of sessions, that I put together, there was some awkward moments, like I'd ask a
man.
question, people would all share, and then there would be like silence for like a minute. And I felt the desire to like fill the space and ask another question, but I knew that if I did that, that would set a precedent that like I am the leader in this space and that everybody's gonna respond to the prompts that I lay out. But just
Uh-huh.
allowing that silence and that awkwardness to exist, like forced
Uh-huh.
other people to fill the space up with their own questions, their own thoughts. And just over time,
Uh-huh.
people really started to get it. So it honestly, it was a lot of fun, and it is a lot of fun just to see, you know, the people take leadership upon themselves, and it's a very simple way. Um,
Uh-huh.
but I do think that those little practices um,
Uh-huh.
start to build long-term behaviors and practices. Um, and quite honestly, even in myself, going and deciding just to create this space myself and take it upon myself
Uh-huh.
to do this outside of my organization has deeply
Uh-huh.
impacted my leadership within the organization.
Wow.
It's made me more confident. It's made me more
Uh-huh.
creative in the workplace. And now I've even, and I don't mind sharing it here, but I even had the organization come up to me and like, hey, like we heard what you're doing with borrowed knowledge and whatnot, and we would love to incorporate it into our own work. You know,
Uh-huh.
I said nah, but I said nah because my concern was that if it is connected to this institution, then that ability for community to co-create it and decide what the topics were and stuff would be gone. You know,
Yeah,
and
that's
that
true.
that I think that's the piece that people enjoy about borrowed knowledge. Um,
Yeah.
but it was a good confidence booster. You know.
Yeah. You like, I mean, you've always had it in you, and I've always admired everything that you've been able to bring to, our time together, whether it be in the same organization or in leadership circles and just being brothers. And so keep doing what you're doing. So what's some advice that you would give to someone who would like to start, something similar in their community, like a borrowed knowledge and co-create space? Like,
Mhm.
because I feel like, I don't know, that's the tough part. Like, a
Mhm.
lot of people want this, but don't know how to do this. Like, so what advice would you give for others who want to start to look at this as a new way of how we rebuild communities, create co-create
Yeah.
space together, find different alternatives, right?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah. So, I could only speak from my experience. So, what I'll say is that, one thing I did forget to do is that borrowed knowledge, it's not like a new thing. I haven't created any new practices or anything. The where this idea formed was from me reading history and reading about the ways that Black people have organized the spaces in the past. That I got this idea.
Mhm.
It was in reading Ella Baker, Du Bois, and just even reading about the practices of SNCC during the civil rights, where I got this idea of creating a democratic, co-created space. So I think
Mhm.
that one thing that is critical is that like if you want to engage in this type of work, um, sometimes just even understanding what's already been done and just again adapting it to your current circumstances could be
Mhm.
huge, right? Because like I learned the principles and I learned the practice for them, but I had to still adapt it to our current situation, which was COVID at that time, and creating a virtual space. That's not something that they could have done in the
Mhm.
60s, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so I think that, just reading and understanding what we've done in the past has been tremendously helpful because, like, to be real, Black people have done so much. They say that there's
Mhm.
nothing new under the sun. And when you start to read about all the different practices and institutions that Black people have built, even under the thumb of like white supremacy and different injustices, you start to recognize all the different things that you can create yourself. So that's one thing I'd like to point out. And then the other, which is kind of still connected to this idea of like there's nothing new under the sun, is there are a lot of great organizations that are doing solid work in our communities already. Um,
Yeah.
so I think that it's important to see what's happening already and getting engaged in those different organizations, either through volunteer work or, just trying to see how you could support, just because there's a lot to learn. And I wouldn't have been able to create borrowed knowledge if I, one, hadn't already engaged with so many different community-based organizations, and two, if I didn't get exposed to the history um, that was already there. Um, and
Yeah.
then maybe the last thing that I'll just say is just like, just be bold, take a chance. I feel
Love
like
that.
we get so concerned about making a mistake or doing a thing perfectly, or even, one thing that is a balancing act for me is sometimes I feel like I have to learn everything before I do a thing.
Yeah.
When in reality, you learn the most through just doing the thing.
Yeah.
I learned so much about Ella Baker about creating democratic space, but it wasn't until I started to like do borrowed knowledge that I was like,
Uh,
oh, okay, like this is how it works. And I was learning so many valuable lessons through the process of organizing that I just wouldn't have learned through a book. Um, so yeah, I would just tell folks that like, yes, read, get involved, but also just,
uh,
at some point you're gonna have to take that step and be bold and practice whatever it is that you've been desiring to do.
I love that. I love that. Be bold, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes your best lessons are the failures or just going through the process. That's why I'm in love with the process. The
Yeah.
process is where I've gotten most of my growth when I just did and said, you know what, I'll figure it out. Let's just do. Let's just, you know, I you have everything that you need within you
Yeah.
to problem solve and get to the next step. So just be cognizant of the lessons. I remember going back to what you were saying. There was some I was trying to look for it. I couldn't find it for the life of me, and I think it was from Du Bois that you sent me on. Like, and I remember reading it, and it was so impactful about a year or two ago about um, I think it was a black man, pact or something like that. I can't remember what it was. Darn.
Mm.
And you had sent it in the group text, and I remember reading it. I was like, "Oh man, this is powerful." And it was like gave
Oh,
this outline of how
go ahead.
of how you know back in that pact that these black scholars or leaders or men had at this time of how they were going to work and be with each other and through community and whatever. And it was just so enlightening and so powerful. What was the name of that thing? Gosh, do you remember
Yeah,
it?
I can't remember what the title of it is, but I know exactly what you're talking about. And let me just, I'm a big Du Bois fan. I try not to stand like advocates and whatnot, but for Ella Baker and Du Bois, I make an exception. And for the readers who haven't read Du Bois, you got to. And one thing I just like to point out is when you read Du Bois, know that this dude lived for 100 years. Okay, maybe like 98, but 100 years. So like,
Yeah,
you can't just read what he published when he was 20 and think that that is Du Bois. You got to read like his entire career and see his trajectory because it's one of the like most beautiful things that I've ever like gone through, and just I learned so much about myself and the practices that I want to live by through reading Du Bois. So yeah, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Du Bois because I'm a Du Bois fan. Also, big shout out to Ella Baker because I've learned so much from her as well. Even though I've never even had the opportunity to meet them.
yeah, yeah. My life is forever changed by you introducing, such fabulous writers and books and content in my life. I haven't got to all of them yet, but
It's
the
all
the
good.
the the snippets that you do send me, I do read them, I do sit with them. So I appreciate every time you send me some good stuff. Um, so what do you think the future has in store for policy work for the things, community organizing, things that you've kind of envisioned through borrowed knowledge, especially for our Black and Brown community. When you look at the future, what do you think the future has in store for this?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I'm optimistic. Um, I feel like, Black people have been fighting for justice, ever since we were brought to this land in chains, and it's looked like a lot of different things. It's looked like rebellions. It's looked like protesting. It's looked like building our own institutions. And I genuinely think that along the way, like we continue to learn from our mistakes and we continue to learn from the past. And I think
Hmm.
that, like, basically what I see from the policy work and the advocacy work right now is like Black people starting to take charge collectively of their future. Which is
Mm.
a little bit like different. I think in the past we've kind of relied on individuals to like save us, quite honestly.
Yeah.
And I think that we've learned that um, that's not going to be the thing that gets us to the promised land. I think that it's going to be like our collective efforts and people getting directly engaged into policy making. And
Hmm.
for people who don't do this work, I sometimes when I say that, they can be like, "Yo, like, what are you talking about? Like, people ain't engaged," but they are. Like I said, our
Yeah.
network is 200 organizations, right? And those organizations have bases of community members who are supporting their work, and all of those people
Hmm.
are directly engaged in creating policies and not just creating them, but also doing the advocacy to get them passed and implemented. And I didn't know that this ecosystem existed before I started to do this work. Um, and I think it exists in a different way than it has existed in the past. So like I'm very optimistic about people really um, taking matters into their own hands and shaping the policies and institutions that kind of govern their life um, to support them rather than police them, punish them, criminalize them, and impoverish them.
Hmm.
So I think that's the future of policy and the future of
Hmm.
advocacy is an actual uh, a democracy that is actually practiced from the bottom up rather than the top down.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
and it's gonna take some time because it's not as those practices aren't necessarily as widespread as they should be. Um, but where they are happening at the local level and then some of the state work that we do, like I think it's really promising.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's people really taking control of their lives and the institutions and their communities back into their own hands, and I think that um, it's exciting to be a part of. And I'm just excited to see that type of practice continue to spread.
Yeah. You and me both. So, I thank you for coming on today and just sharing some of your story, your journey, and then some of that borrowed knowledge with us. I like to try to keep these. Well, I don't know what the drive time is, but like within the drive time, whatever that is, if that is even a thing
Mhm.
anymore. uh, so let's end it off with this. What projects are you currently working on, and where can people find you? What's next for Borrow Knowledge? Whatever you got going on, I want people to get engaged and start to learn more about how they can get active.
Yeah, it's a good question. And, quite honestly, like, this is the first time where I'm not adding a bunch of new projects to my list because I have so much that I'm currently doing. Like, to be real, I sit on three nonprofit boards that just happened last year, and I applied for grad school, UC
Congrats,
Berkeley. So yeah,
congrats.
y'all can send some positive energy my way. I'm gonna take all of their institutional knowledge and bring it back.
Boy.
Well, I don't know. We'll see. Some of it I'll keep and bring it back to community. Some of it we're gonna throw away. But yeah, y'all can still send me some well wishes in that regard. And then for borrowed
Definitely.
knowledge, the next step for that is I'm trying to figure out how to make the actual organization of those more democratic. So like the topics, people are letting me know what they want to do. The spaces when we get together are pretty democratic and free flow, but I'm still doing all the labor to put them together. So I'm trying to now figure
Yeah.
out the way to like get other people to want to do that piece of it, just because that that's a critical piece of um, feeling empowered. And I started to pay folks at the end of last year to do that. So it's probably a thing that I'll continue to
Yeah.
do this upcoming year as well.
Awesome, awesome. I love to see that going in. And if you guys have not visit the website, go to the website, get on the email list so you could be part of the process and make sure you follow Eric Morris Smith on Twitter. Where else? What else you at? I don't even know where else you at. I know I mostly follow you on Twitter. That's where I get.
Basic, Basically Twitter. If you follow me on Instagram, all you're gonna see is screenshots of my tweet on my Instagram because I don't really post that many pictures. I post a picture of me, my pops, and my mom, like once every 6 months. But other than that, it's basically Twitter screenshots. So yeah,
All
Twitter.
right.
Twitter is the spot.
So yeah, definitely check my brother out. Eric Morris-Smith, appreciate you so much. This is another episode of Rise Urban Nation. Make sure you continue to follow us, hit the subscribe, like button, give us a comment if you like the show, and spread the love. We are currently working on the YouTube channel. We've heard you ask for it, so I'm gonna get some of these screen recorders. Hopefully, Eric can lend me a hand with how to hire somebody to do that because that's not my strong suit. So we can get that up and running so people can check it out. This has been Terrell Simmons, Eric Morrison-Smith signing off and saying be bold.